They were seconds away from handcuffing him. The staff at the Royal Kensington Hotel saw a dirty, shouting madman in a tattered coat, terrifying the guests in the lobby. They thought he was a threat. They thought he was a homeless drifter who had wandered in from the cold London rain. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The man they were trying to throw out was worth more than the entire hotel building combined, and he was carrying a secret that had been buried for 40 years. Nobody understood a single word he was screaming, until a quiet, invisible waitress named Stevie dropped her tray and stepped into the line of fire. What she said next didn't just save the man's life, it exposed a scandal that would bring the hotel management to its knees. This is the story of the Russian millionaire and the waitress who heard him. The rain in London on that particular Tuesday in November was not the romantic mist shown in movies. It was a cold, aggressive sheet of grey water that battered the pavement of Mayfair, turning the gutters into rushing streams. Inside the Royal Kensington Hotel, however, the weather was merely a visual backdrop, something for the wealthy patrons to observe safely from behind triple-paned, gold-framed windows. The Royal Kensington was the kind of establishment where the air smelled of beeswax, fresh lilies, and old money. It was a place where silence was a commodity, and the staff were trained to be seen, not heard. Stevie Jordan, a 24-year-old waitress with tired eyes and a uniform that was slightly too large for her slender frame, was currently invisible. She was on lobby rotation, a shift she dreaded. It involved clearing empty martini glasses and polishing the mahogany side tables while trying not to make eye contact with men who wore watches that cost more than her father's house. Stevie kept her head down. She needed this job. The rent on her small flat in Brixton was due in 3 days, and her savings account was currently sitting at double digits. Standing behind the massive marble reception desk was Charles Pellington. Charles was the night manager, a man who groomed his mustache with the precision of a surgeon and viewed anyone earning less than 6 figures as a biological error. He was currently berating a junior receptionist, Tiffany, for the crime of having a pen slightly askew on the counter. "Presentation, Tiffany," Charles hissed, his voice low and venomous. "We sell an image. If the image cracks, the clientele leaves. Fix it." Tiffany's hands trembled as she straightened the pen. "Yes, Mr. Pellington." It was 7:15 p.m. when the revolving doors at the main entrance groaned. Usually the doorman, a sturdy man named Robert, would have intercepted anyone who didn't look the part before they even touched the glass. But Robert was currently distracted, holding an umbrella for a Saudi princess getting into a limousine. The doors spun, bringing a gust of freezing wind into the warm, perfumed lobby, and then he stepped in. The man was a mountain. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to stretch the fabric of his coat to its breaking point. But it was the condition of the man that made the lobby fall instantly, deathly silent. He looked like a shipwreck. His heavy wool coat was soaked through, dark with rain, and stained with what looked like mud, or perhaps dried blood, near the hem. He wore heavy, workmanlike boots that left wet, dirty prints on the pristine white marble floor. His hair was a matted grey mane plastered to his forehead by the rain, and his beard was wild and unkempt. But it was his eyes that were truly terrifying. They were pale blue, bloodshot, and frantic. They darted around the lobby like a trapped animal searching for an exit or a target. He clutched a battered leather satchel to his chest with both hands, his knuckles white. Charles Pellington froze behind the desk. His worst nightmare had just walked through the door. A vagrant, a drifter, in his lobby. "Robert," Charles snapped into his radio, his voice rising an octave. "Front desk, immediately, we have a situation." The giant man took a step forward. He was breathing heavily, a rasping sound that echoed in the quiet room. He looked at the crystal chandelier, then at the guests who were now recoiling, pulling their designer handbags closer. "Sir," Charles shouted, stepping out from behind the safety of the marble barrier. He puffed out his chest, trying to look authoritative. "You are trespassing. You need to leave, now." The man turned his head slowly to look at Charles. The movement was heavy, exhausted. He didn't seem to process the English words. He just stared, his chest heaving. Then he opened his mouth. "Gedeona? Mane nujno je videt." The voice was a deep, gravelly boom that shook the reception desk. It wasn't English. It was harsh, guttural, and loud. Charles flinched back. "I said get out. We do not have money for you. Go back to the street." The man stepped closer, his boots squelching. He raised a shaking hand, pointing a thick finger at the ceiling of the hotel. "Ona zdes. Ja znaju, что ona zdes," he roared, the desperation in his voice mistaken for aggression by everyone in the room. A woman in a fur coat near the elevator screamed. A businessman dropped his phone. Stevie, standing in the shadows near the bar entrance with a tray of empty glasses, felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't scared, though. She was confused. She watched the man's face. He wasn't looking at them with hate. He was looking at them with panic. She took a small step forward, clutching her tray. She knew those sounds. Chaos descended on the Royal Kensington. "Security!" Charles screamed, abandoning all pretense of posh decorum. "Get him out! He's drunk! He's dangerous!" Robert, the doorman, rushed in from the rain, followed by two other security guards, hefty men in black suits who usually spent their nights checking IDs at the club downstairs. They surrounded the large Russian man, forming a tense triangle. "Easy now, mate," Robert said, holding his hands up. "Let's go outside, yeah? Don't make this messy." The Russian man, Victor, looked at the guards. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the posture. They were threats. He tightened his grip on the leather satchel, pulling it so tight against his heart that the leather creaked. "Net!" Victor shouted, backing up until he hit a marble pillar. "Vi ne poнимаете! Времени net!" "No, you don't understand, there is no time." "He's reaching for something," Tiffany shrieked from behind the desk. "He's got a bag." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from discomfort to terror. In a city that had seen its share of tragedies, a strange man shouting in a foreign language and clutching a bag to his chest triggered a primal fear. "Take him down," Charles ordered, his face red with panic and rage. "Don't let him open that bag." One of the security guards lunged. Victor, despite his age and apparent exhaustion, moved with surprising speed. He swung his heavy arm, shoving the guard back with the force of a battering ram. The guard stumbled and fell over a velvet armchair, crashing into a table of complimentary champagne. Glass shattered, liquid sprayed everywhere. The guests screamed and scrambled for the exits. "Police! Call the police!" Charles yelled, grabbing the phone on the desk. "Tell them we have a violent intruder. Tell them he has a weapon." Victor stood panting in the center of the lobby, surrounded by broken glass. He looked defeated. Tears began to well up in his eyes, mixing with the rain on his face. He looked at the angry faces around him, the people treating him like a monster. He slammed his hand on the nearby concierge desk, cracking the wood. "Почему никто не слушает?" he cried out, his voice cracking. It was a wail of pure grief. "40 лет! Я ждал 40 лет!" Charles Pellington had had enough. He signaled to Robert and the remaining guard. "Use the tasers if you have to. Drag him out to the alley and hold him for the police." Robert unclipped the taser from his belt. The red laser dot danced on Victor's soaked wool coat. Victor saw the weapon. He raised his hands, not in surrender, but in a pleading gesture. He fell to his knees on the hard floor, the impact sickeningly loud. He held the bag up, offering it to them, shaking it. "Pожалуйста," he whispered, his energy fading. "Помогите men." "He's surrendering," Robert said, hesitating. "He is distracting you," Charles barked. "Get him out before he hurts someone else. Look at him, he's a lunatic junkie." Robert stepped forward, grabbing Victor by the collar of his coat. The old man was heavy, dead weight. He didn't fight back anymore, he just wept, muttering the same phrase over and over again into the wet floor. Stevie Jordan couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. She had been watching the scene unfold, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had heard the man's words. She had seen the way he held the bag, not like a weapon, but like a child. And she saw the way Charles looked at him, with disgust, not caution. She knew that if the police came, or if they threw him in the alley in this weather, this man would die. Or worse, he would lose whatever he had carried for 40 years. Stevie dropped her tray. The crash of the silver tray hitting the floor cut through the tension sharper than a gunshot. Every head turned toward the bar entrance. "Stop!" Stevie shouted. Her voice was usually soft, barely a whisper in the bustling hotel, but now it rang out clear and authoritative. Charles glared at her. Jordan, what are you doing? Get back to work or you're fired. Don't touch him. Stevie ignored her boss and ran across the lobby, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the marble. She placed herself directly between the massive, kneeling Russian and the security guards. Are you insane? Robert asked, lowering the taser slightly. Stevie, move! He's dangerous! He's not dangerous, Stevie said, breathless, her hands spread wide to protect the man. He's not drunk. And he's not homeless. She turned around and knelt on the floor, ignoring the wet mud soaking into her uniform knees. She looked Victor in the eyes. The old man looked up, startled to see a young woman so close to him. He flinched, expecting a blow. Stevie took a deep breath. She hadn't spoken the language in years, not since her grandmother passed away, but the sounds were etched into her memory. "Я вас слышу," she said softly. "I hear you." "Вы в безопасности." "You are safe." The change in Victor was instantaneous. The wildness left his eyes, replaced by a shock so profound he stopped breathing for a second. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering it near her face as if to check if she was real. Ty govorish po-ruski, he whispered. You speak Russian? Nemnogo, Stevie replied with a sad smile. A little. She turned back to Charles, whose face was purple with indignation. He isn't threatening us, Mr. Pellington, Stevie said, her voice steel. He's asking for help. I don't care what he's asking for, Charles spat. Look at him. He's filth. He probably wants money for drugs. Stevie turned back to Victor. Kto vi kotite? Zakem vi prishli? What do you want? Why did you come? Victor gripped Stevie's arm. His grip was strong but desperate. He pulled the leather satchel open. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a weapon. He pulled out a small, faded black and white photograph of a woman standing in front of this very hotel. The photo looked like it was from the 1980s. Komnata chetiresta diva, Victor said, pointing at the photo. Mane nujno v komnatu chetiresta diva. Ya obeshchalye. Stevie felt a lump in her throat. She looked up at Charles, then at the security guards who were standing around awkwardly. He doesn't want money, Stevie announced to the silent lobby. He wants to check in, specifically into room 402. Charles laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. Room 402, the presidential suite. It's £2,000 a night. Does he have £2,000 in that dirty bag? Does he have a credit card? I doubt he even has a passport. Victor seemed to understand the tone of the manager. He looked at Stevie, searching for translation. On dumayet, kto vas net deneg, Stevie explained gently. He thinks you have no money. Victor's expression hardened. The sadness evaporated, replaced by the cold, iron look of a man who had survived winters that Charles Pellington couldn't even imagine. He stood up. He didn't need help this time. He towered over Stevie, and he towered over Robert. He reached into the deep inside pocket of his dirty coat. Careful, Robert warned, raising the taser again. Victor ignored him. He pulled out a thick envelope wrapped in plastic to keep it dry. He tore the plastic open with his teeth and upended the envelope over the reception desk. Cash, stacks of it, thick bundles of £50 notes, crisp and tightly bound. They tumbled onto the marble counter, sliding over the glossy surface, piling up in a heap that made Tiffany's jaw drop. It was easily £50,000. Maybe more. Victor reached into his pocket again and slammed a heavy black card onto the pile of cash. It was a Centurion card, the black card. The kind you couldn't apply for, you had to be invited. He looked at Charles Pellington with eyes that were no longer pleading. They were commanded. Komnata, chetiresta, diva, he said, enunciating every syllable. Stevie stood up, brushing off her knees. She looked at her boss, whose face had drained of all color. He says, Stevie translated, unable to suppress a small smirk, room 402, and I think he's paying cash. The silence that followed the money drop was heavier than the silence that had followed his arrival, but this was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of shame. Charles Pellington stared at the pile of cash. He looked at the black card. He looked at the dirty, disheveled man he had just ordered to be thrown into the alley. Charles was a man who prided himself on reading people, on knowing a person's worth by their shoes and their haircut. He had just made the biggest miscalculation of his career. Charles stammered. He reached out to touch the card, as if checking if it was a prop. It was heavy, titanium. Sir, there has been a misunderstanding. Victor didn't look at Charles. He looked only at Stevie. He saw her name tag. Stevie, he said, nodding. Tai poidesh so mnoi, toloko tai. You come with me, only you. Stevie hesitated. He wants me to go with him, only me. Charles snapped out of his stupor. Absolutely not. You are a waitress, Jordan. You are not concierge. I will personally escort the gentleman to the presidential suite. Charles put on his best customer service smile, a greasy fake expression that didn't reach his eyes. Right this way, sir. My humblest apologies. We have to be careful, you understand. Charles moved to come around the desk to guide Victor. Victor growled, a low animalistic sound, and stepped back, pointing a finger at Charles's chest. Net, Stevie stepped in. Mr. Pellington, I really don't think you should push him. He trusts me. He doesn't trust you. Charles looked at the cash again. He knew that if this man walked out now and reported this to corporate, Charles would be finished. He swallowed his pride. Fine, Charles hissed at Stevie. Take him up, get him checked in, but do not think this gets you out of your cleaning duties later, and get that money into the safe, Tiffany. Stevie nodded. She gestured toward the elevators. This way, sir. Victor picked up his battered leather bag, leaving the cash on the counter without even a second glance. He didn't care about the money. He only cared about the destination. As they walked to the gold-plated elevators, the guests parted like the Red Sea. The same people who had looked at him with disgust 2 minutes ago now looked at him with intrigue and envy. The eccentric millionaire. The mysterious billionaire. The narrative had shifted instantly. Inside the elevator, the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the lobby. The sudden quiet was intense. Stevie pressed the button for the 4th floor. She looked at the man's reflection in the mirrored walls. Up close, she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. He wasn't just old, he was worn down. His hands were shaking again. Thank you, he said. Stevie jumped. You speak English? Victor let out a long, tired sigh. A little, but when I am upset, only Russian comes. My brain, it disconnects. He tapped his temple, and they were screaming. I could not think. I understand, Stevie said softly. My grandmother was from Omsk. She taught me that when the heart speaks, it speaks in the mother tongue. Victor smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown. It transformed his face, making him look decades younger. Omsk, cold place, good people. The elevator dinged. Floor 4, the hallway was lined with thick plush carpet. Stevie led him to the end of the hall, to the double mahogany doors of Suite 402. She used the master key card she had swiped from the front desk during the chaos. The light turned green. She pushed the door open. The presidential suite was magnificent. A sprawling living area, a view of Hyde Park, a fireplace, and a dining table fit for 10 people. But Victor didn't look at the luxury. He walked straight to the center of the room and stood there, closing his eyes. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the room. Is it the same? He asked, his voice trembling. The hotel was renovated 5 years ago, Stevie admitted gently, but the layout is the same. Victor nodded. He walked over to the fireplace and placed the leather satchel on the mantelpiece. He turned to Stevie. You are a good girl, Stevie. You see people, not just clothes. I try, she said. Mr. Volkov, he said. Victor Volkov. Stevie's eyes widened. She recognized the name. Not from the gossip columns, but from her business studies at the community college she attended during the day. Victor Volkov was a mining magnate. He had vanished from the public eye 10 years ago after a massive tragedy in his factories. He was rumored to be a recluse, living in the Siberian wilderness. He was worth billions. Mr. Volkov, Stevie said, trying to keep her voice steady. Why this room? Why tonight? Victor sat down heavily in one of the velvet armchairs. He began to unbutton his dirty coat. Because, he said, staring at the leather bag on the mantelpiece, tonight is the anniversary, and I have a promise to keep, but I cannot do it alone. He looked at Stevie with intense seriousness. I need you to help me find something in this room. Something I hid here 40 years ago. Before the Iron Curtain fell. Before I had money. Before I lost everything. Hid something? Stevie looked around the pristine modern room. Mr. Volkov, this room has been gutted and rebuilt 3 times since then. If you hid something, it is here, Victor insisted. It is in the bones of the building. And if we do not find it by midnight, he looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. Then my life has been for nothing. Stevie checked her watch. It was 8 p.m. What are we looking for? She asked. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small rusted iron key. It looked ancient. A false brick, he said, in the chimney. But I was young then, strong. Now, he looked at his shaking hands. Now I am weak. And I think your manager, Mr. Pellington, has realized who I am. He will be coming up here soon. Not to apologize, but to see what he can take. Stevie felt a surge of protectiveness. She knew Charles. Victor was right. Charles would be Googling Victor Volkov right now. He would be calculating how to exploit this. Okay, Stevie said, rolling up the sleeves of her oversized uniform. Show me where to look. The presidential suite, usually a sanctuary of silence and high thread count sheets, was now filled with the harsh, grinding sound of metal against stone. Stevie had abandoned her waitress persona entirely. She had fetched the heavy iron poker from the fireplace set and was currently using it as a chisel. Victor, despite his frailty, was on his knees beside her, using a heavy bronze statue of a horse to hammer the end of the poker. It is here, Victor wheezed, pointing to a specific brick inside the cavernous fireplace. It was blackened with decades of soot, indistinguishable from the others to the naked eye. 4th row up, 3rd from the left. Mr. Volkov, Stevie panted, wiping a smear of black ash from her forehead. This is marble facing. The brick is behind it. We're going to destroy the mantle. Destroy it, Victor commanded, his eyes burning with a scary intensity. I will buy them a new hotel if I have to. Just break it. Stevie swung the poker. Crack. A fissure appeared in the pristine white marble. A chunk of stone fell onto the hearth rug. If Charles Pellington could see this, he would have had a stroke on the spot. Harder, Victor urged. Stevie struck again and again. The physical exertion was a release for her. All the nights she had spent being invisible, being talked down to, being treated like furniture, she channeled it all into the swings. With a final resounding crash, the marble facing gave way, revealing the rough red brickwork of the original 19th century chimney. Victor dropped the bronze horse. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them steady. He reached into the hole Stevie had made. He ran his fingers over the rough bricks, counting. Odin, Devar, try. He stopped. He pressed his thumb against the mortar of the 3rd brick. It crumbled. It wasn't cement. It was a mixture of clay and wax he had improvised 40 years ago. Help me, he whispered. Stevie wedged the poker into the gap and leveraged it. The brick slid out with a grinding noise that sounded like a tomb opening. Behind the brick was a hollow space, dark and full of cobwebs. Victor didn't reach in immediately. He sat back on his heels, tears streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the soot on his cheeks. In 1984, Victor began, his voice sounding far away. I was not a millionaire. I was a sailor, a defector. I jumped off a merchant ship in the Thames. I had nothing. The KGB was looking for me. The British police were looking for me. I ran into this hotel through the service entrance to hide from a patrol car. Stevie listened, mesmerized. The wind howled outside the window, battering the glass. I hid in the laundry chute, Victor continued, for 2 days. I was starving. I thought I would die there. And then, she found me. Mary? Stevie guessed softly. Mary, Victor nodded, closing his eyes. She was a chambermaid. She found me shivering in the linen room. She didn't call the police. She brought me bread. She brought me water. She hid me in this room. It was under renovation then, closed off. We stayed here for a week. Just us. He looked at Stevie, his blue eyes piercing. I have never been loved like that since. Not for my money, not for my power, just for me. A dirty, scared sailor. What happened? Stevie asked. I had to leave, Victor said, his voice breaking, to get papers, to get safe. I promised her I would come back in 1 month. I told her to wait for me. I put my most precious possession in this wall to prove I would return. A promise in stone. But you didn't come back, Stevie said. It wasn't an accusation, just a sad fact. I was arrested in Dover, Victor said bitterly, deported, sent to a labor camp in Siberia. It took me 10 years to get out. By the time I returned to London, she was gone. The hotel had no record of a Mary. The staff had changed. I hired detectives. Nothing. It was as if she never existed. He took a deep breath and reached into the dark hole. His hand emerged, clutching a small, rusted metal box. It was an old biscuit tin, the paint peeled away by time and heat. Victor held it like it was the Holy Grail. He tried to open the lid, but the rust had sealed it shut. "Let me," Stevie said gently. She took the tin and used the edge of the poker to pry the lid. With a screech of protesting metal, it popped open. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of old velvet, were 2 things. First, a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple band made of twisted copper wire, something a sailor might make. Second, a cassette tape, a TDK 60-minute cassette, with a handwritten label. For Victor. Victor let out a sob that shook his massive frame. He picked up the tape, pressing it to his lips. "She waited," he whispered. "She left this. She knew I would come back." "We need a player," Stevie said, her mind racing. There hasn't been a cassette player in this hotel since the 90s. But before they could figure out how to play the tape, the heavy mahogany doors of the suite blasted open. Charles Pellington did not enter alone. He was flanked by Robert and the 2 other security guards, their faces grim. But behind them stood 2 police officers in high-visibility jackets, their radios crackling. Charles stopped dead in the entryway. He looked at the debris on the floor, the shattered marble, the soot, the hole in the wall. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Vandalism," Charles announced, gesturing to the police. "Criminal damage. Attempted arson. Officers, arrest them both." "Wait." Stevie jumped up, placing herself between the police and Victor. "We are paying for it. Mr. Volkov can pay for the whole wall." "Mr. Volkov?" Charles laughed, stepping over the expensive rug to get closer. "I looked up your friend, Stevie. Victor Volkov, the Copper King of Siberia. Yes, very rich, but also very unstable. There are rumors of dementia, madness." Charles turned to the police officers. "This man is clearly having a psychotic episode. He has destroyed hotel property. And this waitress," he sneered at Stevie, "is exploiting a vulnerable, confused old man to rob the hotel." "That's a lie," Stevie shouted. "He checked in. He paid cash." "The cash is counterfeit," Charles lied smoothly. "We checked it downstairs. Fake notes, all of it." Victor struggled to his feet. He clutched the rusted tin to his chest. He didn't care about the police. He only looked at Charles with a cold, terrifying clarity. "Tai ljish," Victor growled. "You are lying." "Officer," Charles said, checking his watch, "I want them removed, now. And I want that box entered into evidence. It was stolen from the hotel structure." "It's his," Stevie screamed. "He put it there 40 years ago." "Prove it," Charles challenged. "It was in my wall. It belongs to the Royal Kensington." One of the police officers, a weary-looking sergeant named Jordan, no relation to Stevie, stepped forward. "Sir, put the box down. We need to sort this out at the station." "No," Victor said. He spoke English now, his voice booming. "This is mine, my life." "Grab him," Charles ordered the security guards, "before he hurts someone with that poker." Robert, the doorman, hesitated. He looked at Stevie. He looked at the old man who was clearly terrified of losing the only thing that mattered to him. "Mr. Pellington," Robert said slowly, "maybe we should just let them—" "You're fired too, Robert," Charles shrieked, losing his composure. "Grab him or I will have you charged as an accomplice." The threat worked. Robert and the other guard moved in. Victor roared. It was the sound of a bear cornered by wolves. He swung his heavy arm, knocking the first guard back. But he was old, and he was tired. The second guard grabbed his arm. The police officer moved in to assist, grabbing Victor's other arm. The rusted tin fell from Victor's hand. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, sliding across the room. It stopped right at Charles Pellington's feet. "No!" Stevie dove for it. But Charles was faster. He snatched the tin up. He looked inside. He saw the copper ring and the cassette tape. He frowned. He had expected diamonds. He had expected gold coins. Garbage, Charles sneered. Just garbage. He went to throw the tin onto the sofa, but then he paused. He looked at the cassette tape again. He looked at the handwriting. For Victor. Charles Pellington had worked at the Royal Kensington for 20 years. He knew the history of the building, he knew the secrets, and something about that handwriting, or perhaps the date on the tape label, August 1984, triggered a memory of a rumor about the old owner's daughter. His eyes widened. He looked from the tape to Victor. Well, Charles whispered. This isn't garbage. This is leverage. He pocketed the cassette tape. Take him away. Charles waved his hand dismissively. And the girl. Give it back, Stevie screamed, struggling as a female officer grabbed her wrists. He stole it. Officer, he just put the tape in his pocket. It's evidence, miss, the officer said, not seeing what Charles had done. Calm down. Victor was being dragged toward the door. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was staring at Charles, his eyes wide with horror. He clutched his chest. His face turned a sickly shade of grey. The tape. Victor gasped. Suddenly Victor's legs gave way. He collapsed, dead weight, pulling the two guards down with him. Mr. Volkov, Stevie screamed. Victor lay on the floor, convulsing. His breathing stopped. He's having a heart attack, Robert shouted, releasing his grip immediately. Get back! Give him air! Call an ambulance. Stevie broke free from the stunned officer and fell to her knees beside Victor. She ripped his shirt open. He's not breathing. Start CPR. The room dissolved into panic. The police officers radioed for medics. Robert began chest compressions, counting loudly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Charles Pellington stood by the fireplace, watching the chaos. He touched the cassette tape in his pocket. He knew he should feel guilty. A man was dying. But Charles Pellington didn't feel guilt. He felt the thrill of opportunity. If the old man died, the secret on this tape died with him, unless Charles found a way to use it. The ambulance lights painted the lobby of the Royal Kensington in strobing flashes of blue and red. Victor Volkov was wheeled out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask over his face, paramedics working frantically on him. Stevie ran alongside the stretcher, holding Victor's cold hand. Family only in the ambulance, the paramedic barked as they reached the doors. I'm his niece, Stevie lied without hesitation. She looked at the police officer nearby. Tell them. The officer, sensing the gravity of the situation and perhaps feeling a pang of sympathy, nodded. Let her go. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, Stevie looked back at the hotel entrance. Charles Pellington was standing there watching. He held the rusted tin, but Stevie knew the tape wasn't inside anymore. She had seen him pocket it. She made a silent vow, if Victor survives this, I am coming for you. 2 hours later, St. Thomas's Hospital. Victor was in the ICU. He was stable, but unconscious. The doctors said it was a massive cardiac event, brought on by extreme stress and exhaustion. Stevie sat in the plastic chair in the waiting room, still wearing her dirty, soot-stained waitress uniform. She had the copper ring. She had managed to grab it from the floor when Victor collapsed. She turned the twisted wire over in her fingers. She needed to know what was on that tape. She needed to know why Charles had taken it. She pulled out her phone. She had one contact who might help. Her ex-boyfriend, Dave. Dave was a sound engineer for a struggling indie band in Camden. He collected junk. Dave, she said when he answered, I need a favor, a big one. Do you have a Walkman, or anything that plays cassettes? Stevie, it's 2 a.m. Yeah, I got a deck. Why? Meet me at the Royal Kensington, the service entrance, in 30 minutes. The hotel? Stevie, are you in trouble? Yes, bring the deck and bring a crowbar. 3:00 a.m., the Royal Kensington. Stevie didn't go to the hospital. She went back to the Lion's Den. She knew Charles. He wouldn't leave the hotel. He would be in his office, trying to figure out what he had stolen. She met Dave in the back alley. The rain had stopped, leaving the London streets glistening and black. You look like hell, Dave said, handing her a bulky, battery-powered cassette player. Listen to me, Stevie said, her voice trembling but fierce. I'm going inside. I need you to wait here. If I don't come out in 20 minutes, call the police and tell them Charles Pellington stole evidence from a crime scene. Stevie, this sounds dangerous. It is, but I have to finish the story. Stevie used her staff key card. It still worked. Charles hadn't deactivated it yet, probably too distracted by his prize. She slipped through the kitchen, dodging the night cleaning crew, and made her way to the manager's office on the mezzanine floor. The office light was on, the blinds were drawn, but not all the way. Stevie crept up to the frosted glass door. She pressed her ear against it. She heard a voice, but it wasn't Charles, it was a recording. A woman's voice, tinny and distorted by age and the quality of the tape. "Victor, my love, if you are hearing this, it means you came back. I knew you would." Stevie's heart hammered. He was listening to it. "I cannot wait much longer. My father, he knows about us. He knows I am pregnant." Stevie stifled a gasp. Pregnant. "He is trying to force me to marry Lord Hensley, to merge the estates. He says he will send the baby away. But I won't let him. I have hidden the deed, Victor. The deed to the land the hotel stands on. My grandmother left it to me, not my father. He cannot sell the hotel without my signature. And I have signed it over to our child." There was a pause on the tape. "I am running away tonight, to Ireland. Find me, Victor. Find our daughter. Her name is Stevie." Stevie Jordan stopped breathing. The hallway spun. She grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling. Stevie. It was a common name. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But then she remembered her own history. She was an orphan. She had been adopted at 3 months old. Her birth certificate listed mother unknown. Her adoptive parents, the Jordans, had always told her she was found in a convent in Ireland. Inside the office, the tape clicked off. "Holy Mother of God," Charles Pellington's voice muttered. He sounded terrified. He knew. He had just realized that the waitress he had been abusing for 3 years wasn't just an employee. She was the legal owner of the land the Royal Kensington stood on. If this tape got out, the corporation that owned the building would be sued into oblivion. The land lease would be void. Stevie was the heiress. Charles paced the room. "I have to burn it. I have to burn it now." Stevie didn't think. She acted. She kicked the door open. It flew back, slamming against the wall with a thunderous crash. Charles spun around, the cassette tape in his hand. He looked at Stevie. He looked at the soot on her face, the fire in her eyes. And for the first time, he saw the resemblance. The same jawline as the woman in the old portraits in the hallway. "Give it to me," Stevie said. Her voice was low, dangerous. "Stevie," Charles stammered, backing up toward his shredder, You shouldn't be here. You're trespassing." "I'm not trespassing," Stevie said, stepping into the room. "I'm home. Give me the tape." Charles's eyes darted to the shredder. "It's a fake. It's a lie. A crazy woman's ramblings." "Don't you do it," Stevie warned. Charles lunged for the shredder. Stevie tackled him. She wasn't a trained fighter, but she was 24 and worked 10-hour shifts on her feet, carrying heavy trays. Charles was 50, soft and pampered. They hit the floor hard. The cassette tape skittered across the carpet. Charles kicked Stevie in the stomach, knocking the wind out of her. He scrambled on his hands and knees toward the tape. He grabbed it. He pulled a gold lighter from his pocket. "You'll never prove it," Charles screamed, flicking the lighter. The flame danced. "No," Stevie gasped, trying to get up. Suddenly, the office window shattered. A figure rappelled through the glass, swinging on a rope, boots slamming into Charles's chest with the force of a wrecking ball. Charles flew backward, hitting the wall and sliding down, unconscious. The lighter fell from his hand, extinguishing on the carpet. Stevie stared at the figure standing amidst the broken glass. It was a man in black tactical gear. He stood up and lifted his visor. It wasn't the police, it was one of the security guards from earlier, the one who had hesitated. But he wasn't a hotel guard. He pulled an earpiece out. "Target secure," he said into a microphone. "Mr. Volkov's asset is safe." He picked up the cassette tape and handed it to Stevie. "Who are you?" Stevie whispered. "Private security," the man said. "Victor Volkov has had a team watching him for 10 years. We were ordered to intervene only if his life, or his family's life, was in immediate danger. We were late. I apologize, Ms. Volkov." Stevie looked at the tape in her hand. Ms. Volkov. The reality of it crashed down on her. The Russian millionaire wasn't just a stranger she had helped. He was her father. The sterile white noise of the intensive care unit was a stark contrast to the chaotic luxury of the Royal Kensington. Viktor Volkov lay in the bed, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped in a rhythmic, reassuring cadence. Stevie sat beside him. She hadn't changed out of her uniform. The black dress was stained with soot from the chimney and dust from the manager's office carpet, but she wore it like armor. In her hand, she held the cassette player Dave had brought her. The private security guard, whose name she learned was Kane, stood outside the glass door like a statue. He had already made a call. A team of lawyers, Victor's lawyers, was currently descending on the Royal Kensington like a pack of wolves, freezing every document and securing the physical premises. Stevie looked at the sleeping face of the man who had terrified the lobby just hours ago. Now, cleaned of the mud and grime, he looked noble. He looked like family. She pressed play on the Walkman one last time, keeping the volume low. Stevie, if you find her, Victor, know this. She has my eyes, and she has that stubborn chin of yours. I have left the deed to the land in the name of Stevie Volkov, the original handwritten deed from 1895. It is in the safety deposit box at the Bank of England, key number 402. The same as our room number. I love you, my sailor, forever. The tape clicked off. Stevie felt a tear slide down her cheek. The key Victor had been looking for wasn't the deed itself, it was the clue to find it. And the name, Stevie Volkov. Stevie. The voice was a dry rasp. Stevie jumped. Victor's eyes were open. They were hazy, drugged, but they were focused on her. Mr. Volkov, she whispered, leaning in. You're safe. You're in the hospital. The A box, he croaked. Did Charles? He tried, Stevie said, her voice hardening, but we got it back, and we have the tape. Victor let out a long, shuddering breath. Then, it is over. I failed. The deed, I do not have it. No, Stevie said, taking his large, rough hand in hers. You didn't fail. We listened to the tape, Victor. Mary. She left the deed in a bank vault. For her daughter. Victor's eyes widened. The daughter, I never saw her. I never knew. Stevie took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her own worn wallet. She extracted a small, crinkled photo she had kept since the orphanage. It was the only thing she had from her birth mother, a picture of a woman standing in front of the Royal Kensington, wearing a chambermaid's uniform, smiling at the camera. She held it up next to the photo Victor had brought. They were the same woman. Victor looked at the photo, then at Stevie. He looked at her eyes, green with flecks of gold. He looked at her chin. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His heart monitor sped up, beeping faster. Stevie, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of joy and agony. Moja doch? My daughter. Yes, Stevie choked out. I think I am. Victor tried to sit up, but the tubes held him back. Instead, he squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. Tears flowed freely from his eyes, soaking the pillow. I looked, he sobbed. I looked for 20 years. I thought you were lost. I was, Stevie said, squeezing back, but I was right here, waiting for you to check in. 3 days later, the Royal Kensington Hotel, the board of directors meeting was an emergency session. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat around the long glass table in the conference room, looking nervous. Charles Pellington sat at the head, looking worse for wear. He had a bandage on his forehead, and his arm was in a sling. The incident, Charles said, trying to project authority, was unfortunate, a security breach. But we have handled it. The old man is in the hospital and will be charged with assault once he wakes up. The waitress, Jordan, has been terminated for gross misconduct. Is that so? The voice came from the doorway. The doors swung open, but it wasn't security. It was Stevie. She wasn't wearing her uniform. She was wearing a tailored navy suit that Victor's personal stylist had brought to the hospital that morning. Her hair was down, sleek and professional. Flanking her were 4 lawyers from the firm of Goldman & Weiss, and behind them, walking with a cane but looking strong, was Victor Volkov. You can't be in here. Charles stood up, his face pale. Security. Sit down, Charles. The lead lawyer, a sharp woman named Eleanor, said calmly. She placed a heavy file on the table. Who are you? The chairman of the board asked, looking confused. I am the legal representative for Ms. Stevie Volkov, Eleanor announced, the owner of the freehold land upon which this hotel is built. A silence descended on the room that was absolute. That's impossible, the chairman sputtered. The lease, Stevie spoke up, her voice steady and clear, expired yesterday. It was a 99-year lease, granted in 1925. My mother, Mary, inherited the freehold from her grandmother. She left it to me. Stevie walked around the table. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a queen reclaiming her throne. She stopped behind Charles Pellington's chair. We have retrieved the deed from the Bank of England, Stevie continued. It is ironclad, which means, as of this morning, you are all trespassing on my property. Charles looked up at her, sweat beading on his forehead. Stevie, please. We can work this out. I can mentor you. Stevie looked down at him. She remembered the years of snide comments, the way he snapped his fingers at her, the way he had called her father filth. You're right, Charles, Stevie said coldly. We need to make changes, starting with the management. She turned to the board. Mr. Pellington is fired, effective immediately. He is banned from the premises. If he returns, he will be arrested for the theft of the cassette tape, which we have on security footage, thanks to Mr. Volkov's team. The chairman looked at the documents, then at Victor, then at Stevie. He knew when he was beaten. Agreed, the chairman said. Furthermore, Stevie said, looking around the room, there will be no more invisible staff. Everyone, from the housekeepers to the doormen, will receive a 50% pay rise and full benefits. We are going to run this hotel with dignity. Or you can move your building to another piece of land. Victor smiled. It was a proud, beaming smile. 6 months later, the Royal Kensington was different. The gold leaf was still there, the crystal chandeliers still sparkled, but the air was warmer. Robert, the former doorman, was now the head of security. Tiffany had been promoted to front desk manager, and in the corner of the lobby, at the best table near the window, an old man and a young woman sat having tea every Sunday afternoon. Victor Volkov had retired from mining. He spent his days learning English and telling Stevie stories about her mother. He never carried the battered leather bag anymore. He didn't need to carry his memories in a bag when his future was sitting right in front of him. Stevie didn't quit working. She still walked the floor, ensuring guests were happy. But now, when she saw someone who looked lost, or poor, or out of place, she didn't call security. She remembered the man in the dirty coat. She remembered that sometimes the person everyone ignores is the only one worth listening to. And she made sure that at the Royal Kensington, nobody was ever invisible again. In a world obsessed with appearances, it is easy to judge a book by its cover. Charles Pellington saw a homeless man and saw trash. Stevie Jordan saw a human being in pain and found a father. The story of the Russian millionaire and the waitress reminds us that true worth isn't found in a bank account or a designer suit. It is found in loyalty, in love, and in the courage to speak up when everyone else stays silent. The next time you see someone who looks like they don't belong, remember Victor. Remember that every stranger carries a story, and sometimes that story can change your life. Wow, I still get chills thinking about that moment in the boardroom. What do you guys think? Would you have had the courage to stand up to your boss like Stevie did? And what do you think about the twist with the land deed? Did you see that coming? If this story touched your heart, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel get these stories out to more people. And if you want more incredible true-life dramas, mysteries and twists, make sure to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. I've got another crazy story for you right here on the screen about a man who bought a locked storage unit and found something that the FBI had been looking for decades. Click that and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious.